where the past comes alive through the stories that shaped our nation. What I'm about to tell you sounds like made-up stories, but it's completely true. In 7 hours on a single morning in 1898, one American naval commander destroyed an entire enemy fleet, captured a strategic harbor 8,000 miles from home, and handed the United States its first overseas empire, all without losing a single American life. This is the story of how America became a global superpower in the time it takes to watch a baseball game. Picture this. It's dawn on May the 1st, 1898 in Manila Bay, Philippines. Commodore George Dewey, commanding 6 American warships, is about to face 11 Spanish vessels protected by shore batteries and mines. The odds seem even, maybe even favored toward Spain. But in the next 7 hours, Dewey will carry out what military historians call the most perfect naval victory in American history. By noon, the Spanish Pacific Fleet will be completely destroyed. Spain's 300-year grip on the Philippines will be broken, and the United States will own its first Asian colony. But here's what makes this story absolutely incredible. Dewey was operating completely blind. No satellite intelligence, no radio communication with Washington, no real-time updates. He was sailing into enemy waters with outdated maps, conflicting intelligence reports, and orders that basically said, "Go west and destroy the Spanish fleet." Yet what happened next would shock the world and announce America's arrival as a naval superpower. The stage for this epic confrontation was set months before the first shot was fired in the mahogany-paneled offices of the Navy Department in Washington, D.C. Theodore Roosevelt, then Assistant Secretary of the Navy, had been quietly preparing for war with Spain. While most Americans couldn't even locate the Philippines on a map, Roosevelt was a different breed of politician, a Harvard-educated intellectual who believed America's destiny lay beyond its continental borders. On February 25, 1898, while his boss, Secretary John Davis Long, was away from the office, Roosevelt made one of the most important decisions in American military history. He sent a cable to Commodore George Dewey in Hong Kong that would change the course of American history. Order the squadron except Monocacy to Hong Kong. Keep full of coal. In the event of declaration of war Spain, your duty would be to see that the Spanish squadron does not leave the Asiatic station and then offensive operations in Philippine Islands. This wasn't just a military order. It was a geopolitical revolution wrapped in bureaucratic language. Roosevelt was essentially telling Dewey to prepare to seize the Spanish Philippines, turning America from a continental republic into a Pacific empire. When Secretary Long returned and discovered what Roosevelt had done, he was furious, but it was too late. The wheels were in motion. Dewey received this message while stationed in Hong Kong, commanding what was officially called the Asiatic Squadron. 6 warships of varying capabilities that represented the entirety of American naval power in the Pacific. His flagship, the USS Olympia, was a marvel of 1890s naval engineering, a protected cruiser displacing 5,865 tons, armed with 4 8-inch guns and twin turrets and 10 5-inch rapid-fire guns. Her steel armor could deflect most projectiles, and her twin screws could push her through the water at 21 knots. But the rest of Dewey's fleet was a mixed bag that reflected America's still developing naval power. The USS Baltimore was modern and well-armed, a protected cruiser similar to the Olympia. The USS Boston, while older, was still formidable with her 2 8-inch guns and 6 6-inch rifles. The smaller vessels, USS Petrel, USS Concord, and USS Raleigh, were gunboats and light cruisers that packed less firepower, but offered speed and maneuverability. The USS McCulloch, technically a revenue cutter, and the supply ship USS Nanchen rounded out this unlikely fleet that would soon make history. What Dewey lacked in numbers, he more than made up for in preparation and sheer determination. This was a man who had spent 4 decades in the Navy, rising through the ranks during the Civil War and the long peacetime years that followed. He had served under Admiral David Farragut at the Battle of New Orleans, learning lessons about aggressive leadership that he would soon put to devastating use. Dewey understood that in naval warfare, hesitation kills and boldness wins battles. From the moment he received Roosevelt's cable, Dewey began preparing for war with methodical precision. He drilled his crews relentlessly, turning American sailors into the most accurate gunners in the Pacific. He studied every scrap of intelligence about Manila Bay, memorizing depth charts, current patterns, and the location of Spanish fortifications. He stockpiled ammunition, coal, and supplies, knowing that once war began, he would be operating 8,000 miles from the nearest American base. Most importantly, Dewey gathered intelligence about his enemy. Spanish forces in the Philippines were commanded by Admiral Patricio Montoya y Pasaron, a career officer who had spent most of his life in colonial service. Montoya commanded 11 vessels of wildly varying capabilities. His flagship, the Reina Cristina, was a respectable cruiser built in Britain, but most of his fleet consisted of obsolete gunboats and converted merchant vessels that had been pressed into military service. The Spanish ships faced problems that went far beyond their technological limitations. Colonial service in the Philippines was considered a hardship posting in Spanish. Naval crews were often undermanned and poorly trained. Maintenance was a constant problem in the tropical climate with ships, frequently breaking down and spare parts taking months to arrive from Europe. Morale was low, pay was irregular, and many Spanish officers suspected they were serving a lost cause. While Dewey prepared his fleet, events 8,000 miles away in Havana Harbor were pushing America toward war. On February the 15th, 1898, the USS Maine exploded while anchored in Cuban waters, killing 266 American sailors. The cause of the explosion remains controversial to this day, but American newspapers immediately blamed Spanish treachery. Remember, the Maine became the rallying cry for war in American public opinion, already sympathetic to Cuban independence. Demanded military action against Spain. President William McKinley, a Civil War veteran who understood the true cost of warfare, tried desperately to avoid conflict through diplomatic channels, but Spanish pride and American anger made compromise impossible. On April 11, 1898, McKinley asked Congress for authority to use military force to end the Cuban conflict. On April 25th, Congress declared that a state of war had existed between the United States and Spain since April 21st. For Dewey, waiting in Hong Kong, the declaration of war meant immediate action. British authorities, bound by neutrality laws, gave him 24 hours to leave Hong Kong waters. On April 27, 1898, at 2 p.m., Dewey received the cable he had been waiting for. War has commenced between the United States and Spain. Proceed immediately to Philippine Islands. Commence operations at once, particularly against Spanish fleet. There was no turning back now. The journey from Hong Kong to Manila Bay took 4 days, and every hour increased the tension aboard the American ships. Dewey's vessels sailed in formation through the South China Sea, their crews wondering what they would find when they reached Philippine waters. Would the Spanish be waiting in ambush? Would shore batteries blow them out of the water before they could engage the enemy fleet? Were they sailing into a carefully prepared trap? Dewey used these 4 days to make final preparations and address his crews. On each ship, American sailors cleaned their weapons, checked ammunition supplies, and wrote letters home that might be their last. The Commodore himself spent hours on the bridge of the Olympia, studying charts and rehearsing battle plans in his mind. He knew that once his ships entered Manila Bay, there would be no retreat and no reinforcements. Victory or destruction, those were the only options. As the American fleet approached the Philippines on April 30th, 1898, Dewey faced his most crucial decision. Manila Bay was protected by a narrow entrance guarded by 2 fortified islands, Corregidor and El Fraile, both bristling with Spanish artillery. Intelligence reports suggested the entrance might be mined, creating an underwater death trap for approaching vessels. Spanish lookouts would certainly spot the American fleet long before Dewey could engage the main enemy squadron anchored near Manila. Dewey had two options, both extremely dangerous. He could attempt a daylight assault, accepting heavy casualties from shore batteries in exchange for clear visibility and accurate navigation. Or he could risk everything on a night approach, running the gauntlet of fortifications and potential mines in darkness, hoping to achieve tactical surprise at dawn. Dewey chose boldness over caution, a decision that reflected both his aggressive nature and his understanding of naval warfare principles. At 11:30 p.m. on April 30th, he ordered his ships to proceed in single file through the channel between Corregidor and the mainland. The USS Olympia led the way, her crew at battle stations, every man expecting at any moment to see muzzle flashes from Spanish fortifications or feel their ship shudder from a mine explosion. The tension aboard the American ships was unbearable. 6 warships carrying nearly 2,000 American sailors crept through dark waters toward an unknown fate. The only sounds were the rhythmic churning of engines, the splash of waves against steel hulls, and the whispered prayers of men who knew they might not see another sunrise. Officers checked their watches constantly, calculating distance and time, wondering when the Spanish batteries would open fire. Dewey himself stood on the bridge of the Olympia, a figure of calm confidence in the midst of extreme danger. At 60 years old, with his distinctive white mustache and piercing blue eyes, he embodied the professionalism and determination of the new American Navy. His orders were clear and precise. Maintain course and speed. Do not return fire unless specifically ordered. Trust in American training and American steel. At 12:15 a.m. on May the 1st, 1898, the moment of truth arrived. A Spanish battery on El Fraile Island spotted the silhouettes of American ships against the starlit sky and opened fire. The night erupted with orange muzzle flashes and the thunder of heavy artillery. Spanish shells screamed overhead and splashed into the water around the American vessels, sending geysers of spray across their decks. But here's where Dewey's tactical brilliance showed its true value. Rather than returning fire and revealing his ship's exact positions, he ordered his fleet to maintain course and speed. The Spanish gunners, firing blind in darkness and moving targets, could not adjust their aim effectively. Their shots fell harmlessly into the water or whistled overhead into empty sky. Within 15 minutes, the American fleet had passed beyond the range of shore batteries and was inside Manila Bay. They had done it. 6 American warships had successfully run the gauntlet and penetrated the heart of Spanish naval power in the Pacific. But now came the waiting, and in many ways, this was the most nerve-wracking part of the entire operation. Dewey ordered his ships to reduce speed and maintain formation as they approached the area where intelligence reports suggested the Spanish fleet was anchored. Dawn was still hours away, and every minute felt like an eternity. American sailors peered into the darkness, straining to spot enemy masts or the glow of Spanish signifiers. Officers checked and rechecked their equipment, ensuring that guns were loaded, ammunition was ready, and damage control parties were prepared for action. The Commodore himself paced the bridge of the Olympia, occasionally raising his binoculars to scan the horizon for any sign of the enemy. As the first hints of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky on May the 1st, 1898, American lookouts began to spot vertical lines that could only be masts and smokestacks. The Spanish fleet was exactly where intelligence had predicted, anchored in a defensive line near the Cavite Naval Arsenal, about 5 miles southeast of Manila. Admiral Montoyo had positioned his 11 ships in what seemed like a tactically sound formation. His vessels formed a line parallel to the shore where they could be supported by the guns of the Cavite Arsenal and where their crews could swim to safety if their ships were sunk. The Spanish admiral had also positioned his fleet in shallow water, believing this would prevent the Americans from using their larger ships effectively. But as the sun rose higher and visibility improved, Dewey immediately spotted the fatal flaw in Montoya's strategy. By anchoring so close to shore in shallow water, the Spanish admiral had essentially trapped his own fleet. His ships couldn't maneuver to avoid incoming fire, couldn't retreat to deeper water if the battle turned against them, couldn't use their superior knowledge of local waters to gain any tactical advantage. They were sitting ducks, waiting to be systematically destroyed. At 5:15 a.m., with the tropical sun painting Manila Bay in shades of gold and crimson, the two fleets finally came within sight of each other. The Americans, steaming in column formation at 8 knots, could see the Spanish ships clearly now. 11 vessels flying the red and gold flag of Spain, their crews scrambling to battle stations as they realized the enemy had successfully penetrated their defensive perimeter. Dewey's ships were magnificent in the dawn light. The Olympia, leading the American column, looked like a floating fortress with her white-painted steel hull gleaming in the morning sun. Her 4 8-inch guns were trained toward the Spanish line, and wisps of black smoke from her funnels indicated her boilers were at full pressure. Behind her, the Baltimore, Boston, Raleigh, Petrel, and Concord followed in perfect formation, their crews at battle stations and their guns loaded for action. The range between the two fleets closed steadily. Ba 10 yards, T 10 yards, Lil 10 yards. Spanish guns began to fire at maximum range, their shells falling short and sending up towering waterspouts that marked their attempts to find the range. American gun crews remained disciplined and patient, waiting for their Commodore's order to commence firing. At 5:40 a.m., with the range down to 5,500 yards, Dewey made the decision that would echo through American naval history. Standing calmly on the bridge of the USS Olympia, wearing his dress-white uniform despite the approaching battle, he turned to his flag captain, Charles Vernon Gridley, and spoke the words that every American schoolchild would learn. "You may fire when you are ready, Gridley." Captain Gridley immediately passed the order to the Olympia's gun crews. At exactly 5:41 a.m., the forward 8-inch turret roared, sending the first American shell screaming toward the Spanish line. The Battle of Manila Bay had officially begun, and what followed would be not so much a battle as a systematic demonstration of American naval superiority. The sound of that first shot was like thunder rolling across Manila Bay. The shell, weighing 250 pounds and traveling at 2,100 feet per second, struck the water just short of the Spanish flagship Reina Cristina, sending up a massive column of water that drenched her forward decks. But it was just the beginning. Within seconds, every gun in the American fleet was firing, creating a continuous roar that could be heard for miles. Dewey had planned his attack with mathematical precision, rather than charging directly at the Spanish line, which would expose his ships to concentrated enemy fire. He ordered his fleet to steam in a series of oval patterns past the Spanish formation. This allowed each American vessel to bring its guns to bear, while minimizing exposure to return fire. The Olympia led each pass, followed by the other ships in single file, each captain timing his movements to maintain perfect formation while delivering devastating broadsides. The American gunnery was simply superior to anything the Spanish could manage. Years of training in peacetime had created gun crews that could load, aim, and fire with mechanical precision. The new rapid-fire 5-inch and 6-inch guns could maintain a rate of fire that overwhelmed Spanish damage control efforts. More importantly, American shells were consistently finding their targets, while Spanish return fire was erratic and largely ineffective. The USS Olympia's gunfire was particularly devastating. Her 4 8-inch guns, firing 250-pound armor-piercing shells, could penetrate the relatively thin armor of Spanish cruisers at battle range. Her 10 5-inch rapid-fire guns created a continuous stream of smaller shells that swept Spanish decks clear of personnel and destroyed unarmored structures. Captain Gridley, standing beside his Commodore on the bridge, called out targets and corrections while the ship's guns thundered their deadly message. behind the Olympia. The USS Baltimore added her own firepower to the barrage, armed with 4 8-inch guns and 6 6-inch rifles. She concentrated her fire on the Spanish cruiser Castilla, methodically pounding the enemy vessel until smoke and flames poured from her hull. The USS Boston, with their distinctive twin funnels, engaged the Spanish gunboat Ulloa, her 8-inch guns making short work of the smaller vessel's light armor. The Spanish fleet, trapped by their defensive positioning, could only fire back desperately as American shells tore through their hulls, toppled their masts, and started fires that spread rapidly in the tropical heat. The Reina Cristina, Montoya's flagship, was taking a terrible beating. American shells had destroyed her forward funnel, disabled several of her guns, and started multiple fires that her crew struggled desperately to contain. Admiral Montoya, wounded but still commanding from his bridge, made a decision that epitomized Spanish courage, even in the face of certain defeat. Rather than remain anchored and be destroyed piecemeal, he ordered the Reina Cristina to charge the American line. If his ship was doomed, at least she would go down fighting, trying to close the range where Spanish gunnery might be more effective. It was a gesture of magnificent futility. The Reina Cristina, already badly damaged and listing to port, steamed directly into the concentrated fire of 6 American warships. Dewey, recognizing the Spanish admiral's courage, concentrated his fleet's fire on the charging cruiser. Within minutes, the Reina Cristina was a floating wreck, her admiral wounded and unconscious, her crew abandoning ship as flames consumed her superstructure. The destruction of the Spanish flagship marked the beginning of the end for Montoya's fleet. The cruiser Castilla, overwhelmed by fire from the USS Baltimore, settled by the stern until her decks were awash. The gunboat Ulloa exploded when an American shell penetrated her magazine, sending debris flying hundreds of feet into the air. One by one, Spanish vessels were either sunk, set ablaze, or run aground by their crews to prevent complete destruction. By 7:35 a.m., after less than 2 hours of continuous fighting, the Spanish fleet was in ruins. Every major Spanish vessel was either destroyed or out of action. The shore batteries at Cavite had been silenced by accurate American fire. Spanish casualties were mounting rapidly, with bodies floating in the oil-slicked waters of Manila Bay, and wounded men being evacuated to shore on any boat that could still float. Then something remarkable happened that demonstrates the vast difference in preparation and professionalism between the two fleets. At the height of his victory, with the Spanish fleet clearly beaten, Dewey received a report from his ordnance officer that the Olympia was running low on ammunition. In the excitement of battle, American gun crews had been firing at maximum rate and ammunition consumption was higher than anticipated. This presented Dewey with a crucial decision. He could continue the attack and risk running out of ammunition completely, or he could withdraw temporarily to assess his situation and conserve resources for a potential second engagement. In a display of the cool judgment that made him one of America's greatest naval commanders, Dewey chose caution over immediate gratification. At 7:35 a.m., he signaled his fleet to cease firing and withdraw to the northern part of the bay out of range of any remaining Spanish guns. For the next hour and a half, the American ships conducted what amounted to a floating inventory and damage assessment. Crews counted shells, examined their ships for battle damage, treated the wounded, and prepared for what they assumed would be a second round of fighting. This pause in the battle created one of the most dramatic moments in American naval history. As gun smoke cleared and fires burned themselves out on Spanish wrecks, both sides took stock of what had happened. The Spanish, expecting the Americans to resume their attack at any moment, used the time to evacuate wounded personnel and abandon ships that were clearly beyond saving. Some Spanish vessels were scuttled by their own crews to prevent them from falling into American hands. But when the Americans tallied their own casualties, they discovered something that shocked even Dewey himself. After 2 hours of intense naval combat against 11 enemy vessels and shore batteries, American losses were almost negligible. Not a single American sailor had been killed. Only 8 men were wounded, and most of those injuries were minor. The USS Baltimore had taken 1 hit from a Spanish shell, but the damage was superficial and didn't affect her combat capability. This casualty disparity was almost unprecedented in naval warfare. Spanish losses, by contrast, were catastrophic. Of their 11 warships, 8 were completely destroyed, and the remaining 3 were so badly damaged they would never fight again. Spanish personnel casualties exceeded 380 killed and wounded, with many more missing and presumed drowned. The Cavite naval arsenal was burning, its facilities destroyed by accurate American gunfire. The reasons for this incredible disparity in casualties go to the heart of what the Battle of Manila Bay represented: a clash between old and new approaches to naval warfare. The Americans had embraced modern gunnery techniques, superior training methods, better maintenance standards, and more advanced tactical thinking. The Spanish, handicapped by limited resources, obsolete equipment, and poor preparation, were simply outclassed in every aspect of naval combat. When Dewey resumed his attack at 11:16 a.m., it was no longer really a battle. It was a final accounting, a mopping up operation against an enemy that had already been decisively defeated. The few Spanish vessels that could still float quickly surrendered or were abandoned by their crews. By noon on May 1st, 1898, Spanish flag had been hauled down everywhere in Manila Bay, except over the city of Manila itself. The completeness of Dewey's victory was staggering. In 7 hours of intermittent fighting, he had destroyed the entire Spanish Pacific Fleet, captured the most important harbor in Southeast Asia, and eliminated Spanish naval power in the Western Pacific. American forces now controlled Manila Bay and could attack the city of Manila itself whenever they chose. Spain's 300-year dominance of the Philippines had ended in a single morning. But the true significance of the Battle of Manila Bay extends far beyond its tactical and strategic results. This engagement fundamentally altered America's relationship with the world and established precedents that would shape American foreign policy for the next century. Before May 1st, 1898, the United States was a continental republic focused on internal development and hemispheric influence. After May 1st, 1898, America was a Pacific power with overseas territories, global responsibilities, and imperial ambitions. The international reaction to Dewey's victory was immediate and profound. European powers, which had largely dismissed American naval capabilities, suddenly began taking the United States much more seriously. The German Kaiser reportedly told his naval advisors that America was now a factor in Pacific affairs that must be reckoned with. British strategists began revising their calculations about global naval balance, recognizing that America had announced itself as a serious competitor for maritime supremacy. In the United States, news of Dewey's victory triggered celebrations that lasted for weeks. When word finally reached American shores, remember, there was no instant global communication in 1898. The entire country erupted in patriotic fervor. Dewey became an instant national hero, promoted to admiral by Congress, and awarded a special sword in recognition of his achievement. Cities renamed streets after him. Parents named their children. George, Dewey, and Dewey for President movements sprang up across the nation. The victory also created immediate political and strategic complications that American leaders hadn't fully anticipated. Now that they controlled Manila Bay, what exactly were they going to do with the Philippines? The islands contained 11 million inhabitants who spoke dozens of different languages and had been fighting for independence from Spain even before the Americans arrived. Filipino revolutionaries under Emilio Aguinaldo had been cooperating with American forces, expecting the United States to support their independence movement rather than establish its own colonial administration. This fundamental misunderstanding would lead directly to the Philippine-American War, a brutal 3-year conflict that ultimately cost more American lives than the entire Spanish-American War. But in the immediate aftermath of Manila Bay, such complications seemed distant and manageable. What mattered was that America had demonstrated its ability to project power globally and defeat established European colonial powers in their own spheres of influence. The technological and tactical lessons of Manila Bay were equally significant. Dewey's victory proved that modern steel warships, properly maintained and manned by well-trained crews, could achieve devastating results against even numerically superior enemies. The battle demonstrated the decisive importance of accurate gunnery, superior logistics, and aggressive tactical leadership. Naval strategists around the world studied Dewey's methods and incorporated his innovations into their own doctrines. The battle also highlighted the growing importance of industrial capacity in modern naval warfare. American ships were better designed, better built, and better maintained than their Spanish counterparts. This superiority reflected the rapid growth of American industrial capacity during the late 19th century. The United States was becoming not just a military power, but an industrial giant capable of building and maintaining a world-class navy. From a purely military perspective, the Battle of Manila Bay established principles that would guide American naval strategy for decades. Dewey's emphasis on thorough preparation, superior training, became hallmarks of American naval doctrine. His willingness to accept calculated risks in pursuit of decisive results influenced a generation of American naval officers who would lead the fleet through 2 world wars. The individual stories of courage and professionalism that emerged from the battle became part of American naval tradition. Dewey's calm under pressure, his methodical approach to preparation, and his famous words to Captain Gridley became models for future naval commanders. The battle proved that American naval personnel could match or exceed the performance of any navy in the world when properly led and equipped. The psychological impact of Manila Bay on American national consciousness was perhaps even more important than its immediate military and political consequences. For the first time since the War of 1812, American forces had defeated a major European power in a stand-up fight. This victory validated America's growing sense of national confidence and global ambition. It proved that the United States could compete successfully with established imperial powers and project military force effectively across vast distances. The battle also marked a generational transition in American leadership. Dewey represented the generation of Civil War veterans who had learned their profession during America's great internal conflict and now applied those lessons to global competition. His success at Manila Bay validated the professionalization of the American military that had been ongoing since the 1880s and demonstrated that American officers could match European counterparts in strategic thinking and tactical execution. The economic implications of controlling the Philippines were enormous, though they would take years to fully develop. American businesses gained access to Asian markets that had previously been controlled by European colonial powers. The islands provided strategic coaling stations for American merchant vessels and naval ships operating in the Pacific. Manila became a major base for American commercial and military operations throughout East and Southeast Asia. But perhaps the most profound consequence of the Battle of Manila Bay was the precedent it established for American overseas intervention. Dewey's victory demonstrated that the United States possessed both the capability and the will to use military force far from American shores in pursuit of strategic objectives. This precedent would be invoked repeatedly throughout the 20th century as America became increasingly involved in global affairs. The battle also established important precedents in American civil-military relations. Dewey had operated with remarkable independence, making crucial strategic decisions without direct consultation with Washington. His success validated the principle that field commanders should be given broad discretionary authority to achieve assigned objectives. This approach would characterize American military operations throughout the era of global expansion that followed. As we look back on the Battle of Manila Bay more than 125 years later, its significance in American history becomes even more apparent. This 7-hour engagement was not just a naval battle, but a turning point that transformed America from a continental republic into a global empire. The lessons learned in Manila Bay about preparation, training, industrial capacity, and strategic boldness would be applied again and again as America assumed an increasingly prominent role in world affairs. The ships that fought at Manila Bay would become symbols of American naval power. The USS Olympia, preserved today as a museum ship in Philadelphia, remains a tangible link to this pivotal moment in American history. Her guns, which thundered across Manila Bay on that May morning in 1898, announced America's arrival as a global power and began a new chapter in the long story of American expansion and influence. From the Spanish-American War through 2 world wars, from the Cold War to modern operations in the Pacific, American naval strategy has been shaped by the precedents established in Manila Bay. Dewey's victory proved that American naval power, properly applied, could achieve decisive results against any opponent. That lesson, learned in the waters of Manila more than a century ago, continues to influence American strategic thinking today. That's our comprehensive look at the Battle of Manila Bay, the 7-hour engagement that transformed America into a global empire and established the United States as a major naval power. This remarkable victory demonstrated that superior preparation, training, and leadership could overcome numerical disadvantages and achieve decisive results even in hostile waters, thousands of miles from home base. If you found this deep dive into American naval history as fascinating as we did, make sure to subscribe to Historic America and hit that notification bell so you never miss our latest episodes exploring the battles, decisions, and personalities that shaped our nation. We're constantly uncovering the incredible stories that textbooks often overlook, the moments of courage, strategy, and determination that made America what it is today. Leave us a comment below telling us what other forgotten battles or military strategies you'd like us to explore. Should we dive into the civil or naval actions that revolutionized warfare? The World War II battles that established American Pacific dominance? Or perhaps some of the lesser-known conflicts that shaped American military doctrine? Your suggestions help us decide what stories to tell next. And if you enjoyed learning about how one battle changed the course of American history, check out our playlist on pivotal moments in U.S. military history. From the Revolutionary War to modern conflicts, we're bringing you the detailed stories behind the headlines, the strategic decisions that altered the course of nations, and the individual acts of heroism that defined generations. Until next time, keep exploring the incredible stories that made America. And remember, history isn't just about the past. It's about understanding how we got to where we are today. Thanks for watching The Historic America, where every story matters and every battle teaches us something new about the American experience.